I never imagined that the people who raised me would call me a nuisance and a burden while I was being wheeled into emergency surgery, fighting for my life. But that's exactly what happened 3 weeks after I gave birth to my twins, when everything I thought I knew about family loyalty came crashing down around me. My name is Rebecca Martinez, and for 10 years I had been the family's financial backbone. I'm 32, a senior financial analyst at a major investment firm in Chicago, and I'd always prided myself on being the responsible one. While my younger sister Sarah bounced between art school and various creative pursuits, I was the one who stepped up when our parents needed help. It started small, as these things always do. When Dad lost his job during the 2018 recession, I helped with their mortgage payments. When Sarah wanted to attend an expensive private art college, I covered her tuition because, "She's so talented, Rebecca, and you're doing so well." When they needed a new car, when their roof leaked, when they wanted to take that dream vacation to Europe, I was there, credit card in hand, because that's what good daughters do, right? The house I'm sitting in right now, I bought it for them. The cars in their driveway, my down payments. Sarah's bachelor's degree in fine arts, my student loan payments that I'm still making. Over the years, I'd quietly transferred over $180,000 to support my family, never keeping detailed records because you don't keep receipts on love, do you? My parents, Linda and Frank Martinez, had created this perfect narrative where I was the successful one who had it all figured out, while Sarah was the artistic free spirit who needed protection and support. I wore that label proudly for years, believing that my worth was measured by my ability to solve everyone's problems and write the checks that kept our family afloat. The irony wasn't lost on me that while I funded everyone else's dreams, I was living in a modest apartment, driving a 7-year-old Honda, and putting off my own plans for children because I was too busy bankrolling everyone else's life. But I told myself it was temporary, that family comes first, that someday they'd appreciate everything I'd sacrificed for them. When I married my husband David, a Navy officer, my parents' first question wasn't about my happiness. It was whether this would affect my ability to help them financially. When David got deployed to the Middle East last spring, their concern wasn't about my emotional well-being as a newly pregnant wife facing 9 months alone. Instead, Mom worried aloud about whether military benefits would change my generous nature. I should have seen the warning signs, like how Sarah never had to contribute to family emergencies because she was still finding herself at 28. Or how my parents would guilt me about being too busy when I couldn't immediately drop everything for their needs. But they somehow always had time for Sarah's art shows, pottery classes, and weekend getaways. The pregnancy should have been a joyful time, but it became another source of stress. I was carrying twins, a surprise that thrilled David and me, but seemed to annoy my parents. "Twins are so much work," Mom would say, as if my expanding family was an inconvenience to her. "You'll need so much help. I hope you're not expecting us to be full-time babysitters." I wasn't expecting that at all. I'd already researched nannies, enrolled in childcare waiting lists, and prepared for every contingency. But the casual dismissal stung. This was their first grandchildren, and instead of excitement, I got lectures about how children would change everything and make me less available for family obligations. When complications arose during my pregnancy, gestational diabetes, high blood pressure, concerns about premature labor, my parents seemed more worried about how this might affect their upcoming plans than about my health. Sarah had convinced them to plan a mother-daughter bonding trip to see Elton John in concert, and any mention of my medical concerns was met with, "You'll be fine, you're strong," or "Doctors worry about everything these days." David's deployment happened when I was 6 months pregnant. The timing was terrible, but military families learn to adapt. I assured him I'd be fine, that my family would step up if I needed help. My parents promised they'd be there for me, and I believed them. After all, hadn't I always been there for them? The twins arrived 3 weeks early on a Tuesday afternoon in October. Labor was intense but manageable, and David managed to video call from his base to see his children take their first breaths. Emma and Michael were perfect. Tiny, healthy, and utterly beautiful. For 48 hours, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. Then, the complications started. It began as unusual bleeding that the nurses initially dismissed as normal postpartum recovery, but the bleeding increased and my blood pressure started dropping. The medical team grew concerned, ordering tests and monitoring me more closely. What they discovered was a retained placental fragment that was causing severe hemorrhaging, a condition that required immediate surgical intervention. I was terrified. David was 8,000 miles away, unreachable due to a communications blackout during a military operation. I was alone in a hospital room with 2 newborns, facing emergency surgery, and I needed help. Not financial help this time, just simple human support. Someone to watch my babies while I went under anesthesia, not knowing if I'd wake up. I called my parents at 8 in the morning, my voice shaking as I explained the situation. The surgeon had scheduled the operation for 2 p.m., and I needed someone to stay with Emma and Michael. Hospital policy required a family member or approved caregiver to be present with newborns during procedures. "Mom, I'm scared," I whispered into the phone, watching my babies sleep in their bassinet. "The doctor says there could be complications. I just need someone to be here with the twins for a few hours." There was a pause that lasted too long. Then Mom's voice, strained and irritated. "Rebecca, you know we have plans today. Sarah and I are driving to Milwaukee for the Elton John concert tonight. We've had these tickets for months." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Mom, this is emergency surgery. I could die if they don't operate." "Don't be so dramatic. You're young and healthy. Doctors do these procedures all the time." Her tone was dismissive, almost annoyed. "Can't you ask one of your friends?" I thought about my friends. Most lived across the country. Others had young children and couldn't drop everything for an emergency. My work colleagues were professional acquaintances, not people I could call for family emergencies. David's parents lived in Florida and couldn't travel on such short notice. "Mom, please. I've never asked for anything like this. I just need a few hours." "Rebecca." Dad's voice had taken over the phone, stern and final. "You're being unreasonable. We can't just cancel our plans because you're having some minor medical procedure. Sarah's been looking forward to this concert for months. It's Elton John. This might be his last tour." The words hit me like a physical blow. Minor medical procedure, as if emergency surgery to stop life-threatening bleeding was comparable to a routine dental cleaning. "Besides," Mom's voice returned, sharper now, "you're always so independent. You handle everything yourself. I'm sure you'll figure something out like you always do." Then came the words that would haunt me forever. "Honestly, Rebecca, you're being a nuisance and a burden. We can't drop our lives every time you have a crisis." The line went dead. I stared at my phone for a full minute, certain I'd misheard. Nuisance and a burden. After 10 years of supporting them financially, after every sacrifice I'd made, after every time I'd dropped everything to solve their problems, I was a nuisance and a burden for asking them to watch their grandchildren while I underwent emergency surgery. The nurse found me crying 20 minutes later, still holding my phone, watching Emma and Michael sleep peacefully in their hospital bassinet. Through tears, I explained that I needed to arrange alternative childcare. She looked confused. "Most family members would have been racing to the hospital by now," she said gently. I called a professional childcare service, arranging for a licensed nanny to stay with the twins during my surgery. The cost was $400 for 5 hours, money I could afford, but that wasn't the point. The point was that my parents had chosen Elton John over their daughter's life and their grandchildren's safety. As they wheeled me toward the operating room, I watched the professional nanny, a kind woman named Mrs. Chen who specialized in newborn care, settling in with my babies. She was everything my parents should have been: present, caring, reliable. A stranger was showing more love for my children than their own grandparents. The surgery was successful. The retained placental tissue was removed, the bleeding stopped, and I woke up 3 hours later to find Mrs. Chen holding Michael while Emma slept. She'd fed them, changed them, and sung lullabies in the rocking chair. She treated my children with more tenderness in 3 hours than my parents had shown in 3 weeks. That evening, as I recovered in my hospital bed, I saw the Facebook posts. My parents and Sarah at the Elton John concert, beaming and singing along, having the time of their lives. The caption read, Amazing night with my favorite daughter. Some things are worth waiting for. Elton John. Mother-daughter time. Best night ever. My favorite daughter. While I'd been under anesthesia, fighting complications from childbirth, they were posting about their favorite daughter. The message was crystal clear. Sarah would always be the priority, and I would always be the backup plan, the financial solution, the one who could handle everything herself. But something had shifted during those hours in surgery. Maybe it was the anesthesia, maybe it was the hormones, or maybe it was just clarity finally breaking through years of willful blindness. For the first time in my adult life, I saw my family's dynamic with perfect, painful clarity. I wasn't their daughter, I was their ATM. I wasn't Sarah's sister. I was her scholarship fund. I wasn't valued for who I was. I was valued for what I could provide. And when I truly needed them, not money, not favors, just basic human decency during a medical emergency, they had chosen entertainment over my life. They had called me a burden for needing help after 10 years of carrying their burdens without complaint. The next morning, still weak from surgery and caring for 2 newborns, I made a decision that would change everything. I opened my laptop and began documenting every financial transaction I'd made on behalf of my family over the past decade. Bank transfers, credit card payments, loan payments I'd made for Sarah's education, mortgage assistance, everything. The total was staggering. $184,000 over 10 years, nearly $200,000 of my hard-earned money, given freely because I believed in family loyalty and love. Money that could have bought me a house, funded my own children's education, or secured my retirement. Instead, it had purchased my parents' comfort and Sarah's dreams while I lived modestly, and delayed my own life plans. As I fed Emma and Michael in my hospital room, I realized that my children would never know a grandmother who called their mother a burden during a medical emergency. They would never grow up believing that love was conditional on financial contribution. They would never experience the pain of being valued only for what they could provide, rather than who they were. I was going to make sure of that. The next phone call I made wasn't to my parents. It was to my mortgage company, instructing them to remove my authorization for automatic payments on my parents' house. Then I called Sarah's college, requesting information about discontinuing my financial responsibility for her remaining tuition. Finally, I contacted my bank and canceled every automatic transfer, every shared account, every financial connection that tied me to my family. If I was such a burden, then I would lift that burden from their shoulders permanently. But that was just the beginning. The real reckoning was yet to come. The first week home from the hospital passed in a blur of feeding schedules, diaper changes, and the exhausting reality of caring for newborn twins alone. Mrs. Chen had agreed to help for a few additional days, and her presence was a godsend. She showed me techniques for tandem feeding, helped establish routines, and most importantly, provided the emotional support that should have come from family. During those quiet moments while the twins slept, I found myself researching topics I'd never considered before. Narcissistic family dynamics, financial abuse within families, and something called the family scapegoat versus golden child syndrome. The articles read like someone had been documenting my life for the past decade. I learned about parentification, how some children are forced into adult roles, becoming caregivers and providers for their own parents. I read about enmeshment, where family boundaries become so blurred that individual needs disappear in favor of family demands. Most painfully, I discovered that my situation wasn't unique. Thousands of people shared stories online about being their family's bank while watching siblings receive unconditional love and support. The rage came slowly at first, then all at once. For years, I'd internalized their narrative that I was lucky to be successful, that my abilities came with obligations to support those less fortunate. I'd accepted that Sarah needed protection because she was sensitive and artistic, while I was expected to be strong and self-sufficient. I'd believed that love meant sacrifice, even when that sacrifice was destroying my own dreams and financial security. But lying in my hospital bed, fighting for my life while they chose a concert, had shattered that illusion completely. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as a resource. And when that resource became inconvenient or needy, I was suddenly a burden to be dismissed. The research phase lasted 2 weeks. I documented patterns, printed articles, and began understanding the psychological mechanisms that had kept me trapped in this dynamic for so long. Knowledge became my armor, protecting me from the guilt and gaslighting I knew would come once my parents realized their financial lifeline had been severed. I also began reaching out to other people who'd shared similar experiences, online support groups for adult children of narcissistic parents, forums for people who'd gone no contact with toxic family members, and therapy resources for financial abuse survivors. I wasn't alone in this experience, and that realization was both comforting and heartbreaking. David returned from deployment when the twins were 5 weeks old, and I'd never been so grateful to see another human being. His first reaction upon hearing about the concert incident was pure disbelief, followed by anger that surpassed even my own. "They did what?" he asked, holding Emma while I explained the events leading up to my surgery. "You nearly died and they chose Elton John?" Seeing the situation through David's eyes, someone who wasn't enmeshed in my family's dysfunction, provided additional clarity. He couldn't understand how parents could abandon their daughter during a medical emergency, and his confusion helped me realize how abnormal my family's behavior truly was. "Rebecca," he said carefully, "I know you love them, but this isn't normal family behavior. You've been supporting them for years, and the one time you needed help, they called you a burden. That's not love. That's exploitation." Together, we developed a strategic plan. David's military training had taught him the importance of thorough preparation before any major operation, and cutting financial ties with my family was definitely a major operation. We gathered documentation, established new financial accounts, and prepared for every possible response. The plan was simple but comprehensive. Cease all financial support immediately, implement strict boundaries, and prioritize our own family's needs above all else. If my parents wanted to rebuild a relationship, it would have to be based on mutual respect and genuine care, not financial dependency. The first domino fell 3 days later when my parents' mortgage payment bounced. Mom called at 7 a.m., her voice panicked and shrill. "Rebecca, there's been some kind of mistake with the bank. Our mortgage payment didn't go through, and they're threatening late fees." I was feeding Michael and David was burping Emma. Our morning routine had become a perfectly choreographed dance of bottles, burp cloths, and quiet cooperation. The peaceful domesticity of the moment made my mother's financial crisis feel surreal and distant. "There's no mistake, Mom," I said calmly. "I canceled the automatic payment." Silence. Then, "What do you mean you canceled it? You can't just cancel our mortgage payment." "Actually, I can. It's my money coming from my account, paying for your house, and I've decided to stop." "But Rebecca, we can't afford the mortgage without your help. You know that. We'll lose the house." The desperation in her voice might have moved me 6 weeks ago. But now, with my newborn son in my arms and the memory of their abandonment fresh in my mind, I felt nothing but cold resolution. "You should have thought about that before you called me a nuisance and a burden while I was facing emergency surgery." "We didn't mean—" she started, but I cut her off. "You absolutely meant it. You had a choice between supporting your daughter during a life-threatening medical emergency and going to a concert with your favorite daughter. You chose the concert. Now I'm choosing my own family." The call ended with her screaming about ingratitude and family obligations, but I'd already moved on to my next task, calling Sarah's college financial aid office. The conversation with Sarah came 2 days later, after the college had informed her that her tuition sponsorship was being terminated. Unlike Mom's panic, Sarah's call was pure rage. "How could you do this to me?" she screamed into the phone. "I'm in my final semester. You're going to ruin my graduation." "Sarah," I said, bouncing Emma gently while we talked, "I've paid for 3.5 years of your education. That's $127,000 in tuition, room, and board. I think I've been generous enough, but I can't afford to finish. You know I don't have money." "You're 28 years old. You've had 4 years to figure out your finances. Mom and Dad have had 10 years to save money instead of relying on my support. This isn't my emergency, it's yours." "What am I supposed to do?" Drop out? You could do what millions of other students do. Get a job, apply for loans, or ask your parents for help. You know, the parents who chose to take you to Elton John instead of helping their daughter during emergency surgery. The silence that followed was profound. For the first time in our relationship, Sarah couldn't argue with my logic because she knew exactly what had happened at the hospital. She'd been there, posting selfies from the concert while I was under anesthesia. "Rebecca," she said finally, her voice smaller now, "we didn't know it was that serious." "You didn't care enough to find out, and that tells me everything I need to know about your priorities." The financial impact was immediate and devastating for them, exactly as I'd intended. Without my mortgage payments, my parents faced losing the house they'd grown accustomed to thinking of as their own. Without tuition support, Sarah had to choose between taking out loans for her final semester or dropping out entirely. Without my emergency fund backing them up, they suddenly had to confront the reality of their own financial irresponsibility. The phone calls came daily for 2 weeks. First pleading, then angry, then desperate. Dad tried guilt. "Family doesn't abandon family, Rebecca. This isn't how we raised you." Mom tried manipulation. "You're hurting innocent people because your feelings got hurt." Sarah tried emotional blackmail. "I'll never forgive you if you ruin my college graduation." But I'd done my research. I understood their tactics now, and knowledge had immunized me against their manipulation. Every call was met with the same calm response. "I'm no longer available to solve your financial problems. You'll need to find other solutions." The breaking point came when they showed up at my house unannounced, 3 weeks after I'd cut off their financial support. I was alone with the twins when the doorbell rang, and I found all 3 of them on my doorstep. Mom crying, Dad red-faced with anger, and Sarah holding what looked like official documents. "We need to talk," Dad announced, pushing past me into the living room. "Actually, you need to leave. I didn't invite you here." "This is ridiculous, Rebecca," Mom sobbed. "We're family. You can't just cut us off because of one misunderstanding." "One misunderstanding?" I felt that cold rage returning. "You abandoned me during emergency surgery to go to a concert. You called me a nuisance and a burden for asking you to watch your grandchildren while I fought for my life. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a choice you made." Sarah stepped forward, holding out the papers. "Look, I've worked out a payment plan with the college. If you just cover this final semester, I'll pay you back after graduation. I promise." I glanced at the documents without taking them. "Sarah, you've never paid me back for anything in your life. Your promises are worthless." "How can you be so cruel?" Mom wailed. "We raised you better than this." That's when something inside me snapped completely. "You raised me to be your personal ATM," I shouted, my voice echoing in the quiet house. "You raised me to believe that my worth was measured by my bank account. You raised me to sacrifice my dreams for everyone else's comfort. You didn't raise a daughter, you raised a resource." I was shaking now, 10 years of suppressed resentment pouring out. "I bought you a house, paid for Sarah's college, funded your vacations, covered your emergencies, and saved your financial asses more times than I can count. And the one time I needed help, you called me a burden and chose a concert over my life." "Rebecca, please," Dad started. "No, I'm done. I'm done being your backup plan, your emergency fund, your solution to every financial problem you create. I'm done pretending that one-sided support is the same thing as love." I walked to the door and opened it. "You need to leave, now." "You'll regret this," Dad said as they filed out. "Family is all you have in this world, and you're throwing it away." "No," I replied, looking at the twins sleeping peacefully in their bassinets. "Family is what you build with people who actually love you. What we had wasn't family. It was a financial arrangement disguised as love." The final blow came 2 weeks later when the full consequences of their financial dependence became public. Without my support, my parents couldn't maintain their lifestyle. The house I'd been paying for went into foreclosure proceedings. Sarah had to transfer to a community college to finish her degree with in-state tuition rates. Dad had to come out of retirement and take a part-time job at Home Depot. The social media posts that had once showcased their comfortable lifestyle, vacations I'd funded, dinners at restaurants I'd paid for, Sarah's college adventures I'd sponsored, suddenly stopped. The carefully curated image of family success crumbled when the financial foundation was removed. Word spread through their social circle quickly. Family friends began asking questions about why their house was in foreclosure, why Sarah had suddenly transferred schools, why they seemed to be struggling financially when they'd been so comfortable for years. The truth emerged piece by piece. For a decade, their lifestyle had been subsidized by their daughter, and when that support ended, their actual financial situation was revealed. The judgment was swift and harsh. Friends who'd known about my support were horrified by the hospital incident. Extended family members who learned the full story sided with me overwhelmingly. Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, called to express her disgust at their behavior. "I can't believe they chose a concert over your surgery," she said. "What kind of parents do that?" Even some of Sarah's friends began distancing themselves when they learned that her college experience had been funded by her sister's sacrifice. The narrative they'd constructed, successful parents supporting their artistic daughter, collapsed under scrutiny. But the most satisfying consequence was watching them struggle with responsibilities they'd never had to face. Mom had to learn budgeting for the first time in 10 years. Dad had to swallow his pride and work retail at 72. Sarah had to take out student loans and work part-time while finishing school, experiencing the financial stress that most students face. For the first time in a decade, they were living within their actual means rather than mine. Meanwhile, my own life transformed in ways I hadn't expected. Without the constant financial drain of supporting 3 additional adults, David and I could finally focus on our own family's needs. We started a college fund for Emma and Michael. We began looking at houses with enough space for our growing family. We could make decisions based on our own priorities rather than always considering how it would affect my parents' finances. The twins thrived in an environment free from the chaos and manipulation that had defined my relationship with my family. David and I created traditions based on love and respect rather than obligation and guilt. We made friends with other military families who understood the importance of chosen family, people who become closer than blood relatives through shared experiences and mutual support. 6 months after cutting contact, I received one final letter from my mother. In it, she outlined all the ways I'd destroyed the family, how my selfishness had caused everyone suffering, and how she hoped I'd come to my senses before it was too late. The letter was classic manipulation. No acknowledgement of their behavior, no apology for the hospital incident, just blame and guilt designed to make me resume my role as family financier. I read it once, showed it to David, and then threw it away without responding. That night, as I watched David read bedtime stories to our 8-month-old twins, I realized something profound. This was what family looked like. Not financial transactions disguised as love, not conditional support based on what someone could provide, but genuine care, mutual respect, and unconditional acceptance. Emma and Michael would grow up knowing that they were valued for who they were, not what they could give. They would understand that healthy relationships required boundaries, that love shouldn't cost money, and that family loyalty worked both ways. They would never have to choose between their own well-being and someone else's comfort. I had broken a cycle that could have continued for generations. My children would never know the pain of being seen as a resource rather than a person. They would never experience the heartbreak of being abandoned during their greatest moment of need. In saving myself, I had saved them too. The woman who had once measured her worth by her bank balance was gone. In her place was someone who understood that true wealth comes from relationships built on mutual respect, that real family shows up during emergencies, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable someone else's dysfunction. I was no longer their ATM. I was no longer their backup plan. I was no longer their burden. I was free.